For the day before Christmas 2017, you've found the Georgia Gang. Topping our agenda today, a massive power outage at the world's busiest airport. In state news, Plant Vogtle gets the okay from the Public Service Commission with conditions. And would you raise taxes to pay higher salaries for your police statewide? Some of the stories up for grabs on the Georgia Gang.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
And we're glad you could be with us on this day before Christmas. Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy holidays, all that sort of thing. We're here. We're alert. We're on it. And it was a week ago today that something really unthinkable happened. Just unthinkable. All power at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, Jeff, shut down. Your son was in the middle of it.
His was one of the first planes to land right after the power went out, right around 12:30, and sent me a text at 9 o'clock when his ordeal was finally over.
9 hours later.
He spent hours on the tarmac because there are very few ladders there, and they take the ladder from plane to deplane people instead of using the chutes that every plane has. So people were stuck for hours. They were walking, he described, like zombies through these darkened terminals with lighting their way with their cell phone flashlights. And it was a horrific event for so many people. But I mean, look at the effect overall, not just for people here in Atlanta, right? But people traveling to Atlanta, making connecting flights in Atlanta, global air traffic, all of that was affected by a power outage caused by a fire in a Georgia Power station in the airport. And I think that it's important that we remember and acknowledge that the airport in the city of Atlanta is a customer of Georgia Power, just like so many others are.
Mm-hmm. Well, Alexis, you and I have been gimped up a little bit, okay?
Yes.
We got hips and we got knees and we got things like that. And as the day went on a week ago, it occurred to me that if you are going to move in that airport without power, you got to be able to climb stairs.
That's right.
You've got to be able to walk considerable distances.
That's right.
And that airport needs not only a power fix, but a handicapped kind of a disabled person's fix.
If you've got any kind of disability or infirmity, you're really up the creek without a paddle. Because the stairs, the elevators won't work if there's no power, and that's the only way you can get up and down from the concourses to the terminal.
If you go down, you got to come back up.
That's right.
So Phil, I turn to you, the authoritarian among us. So we've said how bad it was, and it was bad. It was awful.
Yeah.
What do we do?
Well, what we do, Jeff and I were talking just before we began the broadcast, they need to have an evacuation plan. How about that as number one? And sadly...
How about, can I correct you? How about a redundant power system
well,
that works?
Yeah, Jeff pointed out correctly that the main power source failed, and then the redundant power source was right next to it, which also caught fire. Right. That makes no sense at all. And then Insider Advantage is investigating this, and I want to find out what the end result is. But there are other backup generators at the airport that failed, and I'm told that even one generator had no fuel. So number one, Dick, the evacuation plan, and number two, the first responders came. We looked at a timeline. You mentioned your son's ordeal. It wasn't until 4 or 5 o'clock that they were able to get the fire out. The police were there late. We saw on our own Fox 5 reports of people, hungry people, frustrated people breaking into the restaurants and taking food.
And all the restaurants had to destroy all their stock.
Well, that's right. And we can go right down the list, too, as to the things that went wrong. And so I would hope that all the airports in this country, let alone our own Atlanta airport, is going to really take a look at how do we handle these type of power outage emergencies, and how do we do first responders.
And, interestingly, it wasn't the first time. It's not the first time that we've had this kind of shutdown at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. 10, 12 years ago, there was an ice storm in Atlanta. Right. And planes couldn't land, and they couldn't take off, and people sat literally for 12 hours in an airplane on the tarmac. It was a catastrophe. Reports were done. There was lots of navel gazing on the part of the airport and the airlines. Reports were written about how to deal with these kinds of emergencies in the future, and still we didn't seem to have a clear path forward in terms of communicating with people who were traveling and getting people off airplanes so that they don't have to sit there for hours on end.
Well, the news was slow developing.
It was.
And even slower was action by Mayor Kasim Reed. I understand his reasoning, but he was 6 or 7 hours before he sort of alerted the public from his perspective what was going on.
And I think to his credit, though, to his defense, he didn't know what was going on.
Exactly, that's what I say. I understand.
Wait a minute, we did know by 4 or 5 o'clock that there was a massive fire that had caused the outage.
So I don't know
what he didn't have anything to tell people what to do.
That's what I'm saying. He was trying to tell them what to do and what the solution was.
Well, this is where I fault I don't know why the police response and was so lax. I don't understand it, and that's the city's responsibility.
Now, well, wasn't that lax? I mean,
well, yeah, people are breaking into restaurants and stealing food. As a restaurant owner, that you wouldn't be too thrilled.
Well, the governor sent in 24 state troopers. Clayton County police were there. For all I know, College Park police were there. That airport is so vast.
Yeah.
Where do you
start?
Yeah, how do you
deploy them?
It was. I think that it was really more a question of how do you communicate with people when they go to the gate? How do you communicate? How do you tell folks what's going on?
I agree with that.
And in the airport, and I mean the airport, the Department of Aviation, in their defense, they put out tweets. They said, you know, we've got a fire, and don't come to the airport. We saw all of those. We saw those alerts that say we're coming over, and folks were enjoying their Sunday watching football. But we didn't know the extent of it, right? Except for those who were directly affected.
I had no idea.
And that's the other thing with all the concourses. How do you communicate when there's no communication?
Well, it goes back to having a plan. Let me go back though. Back to our discussion though on the planes. Well, let me go back to the planes. Just make a quick point, Dick. I don't understand why Delta and anybody else didn't have those food trucks coming out to try to, help people like your son that were on that tarmac. I don't think anyone ought to be on a tarmac for 5, 6, 7 hours, 8 hours. That's ridiculous. And then there should be a plan for that. But at least they could get them food and water. And a little hats off to Chick-fil-A. They broke their no Sunday rule.
And on a Sunday.
They broke their no Sunday service rule out of Christian charity, and they distributed to their credit.
And they responded to the mayor's request too.
That's true. I think the mayor asked them, and they delivered.
And they did.
But I don't know the extent of it. I mean, if it was somebody on Concourse F getting a Chick-fil-A sandwich, I don't know.
Well, they said 5,000 sandwiches were distributed.
And it was more than that. It was quite a lot. Yeah, they went.
But weren't there 35,000 people in the airport and on planes?
Well, you had to slice up those.
Had to share the sandwich.
I'm totally off script now. But think about it. We should mention that there were 35,000 people involved in this.
And more.
That's a lot.
And more. If you're on a flight from Paris or Rome and you've got a connecting flight in Atlanta, you're affected by this. We have no idea how many people were affected by this. Meantime, Delta says that it wants its $25 to $50 million back that it lost.
Right.
And it's looking at the city of Atlanta and presumably Georgia Power
Georgia Power is going to have a problem with the PSC on this matter. We're going to talk about the other matter in a minute. But the PSC is saying to the power company, we got some questions we want answers to.
Right.
This is a bad deal for Georgia Power. In fact, it was a bad week, which we're going to get to in just a minute. It was a mixed week, which we'll get to in a minute. So we're off script. Let's leave this. Let's regroup and come back, and we'll continue the discussion about Georgia Power and the decision on Plant Vogtle.
Right.
So stay with us.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Visit their website at fox5atlanta.com.
A couple of endpoints to that discussion of the power outage at Hartsfield International Airport. We want to stress that Delta and its chairman, Ed Bastian, have made the point that they want something like $50 million in damages.
For the cancellation of 1,000 flights. And
do you collect that from the city or from Georgia Power? I don't know. And Delta's, of course, had, Jeff, you mentioned 12 years ago, but it was this year, this calendar year, in which Delta had the massive computer meltdown.
Right.
And it was almost as big a deal as this was, though not quite the same human cost. So all of a sudden, Georgia Power's in the news, the Public Service Commission's in the news, and yet for Georgia Power, the best was yet to come, because the PSC approved, Phil, the 2 new nuclear reactors at Plant Vogtle with conditions.
That's right, and the conditions are important. There's a tax credit that Congress has to pass to help Georgia Power and the other owners, but this was a victory because, as I've said on this broadcast before, it would have been absolutely reckless to have abandoned this project. Yes, there's cost overruns. Yes, you know, it's billions of dollars that we didn't realize after the Westinghouse bankruptcy, the main contractor bankruptcy. So, and also I did see, I was looking at some of the details just before the broadcast. I understand that part of this agreement is a rebate back to the ratepayers in the third quarter of $75. That's
which
right.
we've been paying $100 every year since.
That's right.
2011.
So I think the people of Georgia that want electric reliability and the power company, they dodged a bullet, and I think the Public Service Commission, it was a tough decision, but they did the right thing.
But just to emphasize, this is the first time ever that we've had ratepayers instead of shareholders in the company picking up the lion's share of the freight.
Picking up the tab, and of course that was done back in 2011 when the deal was struck that ratepayers would finance this project.
That was a bill by the legislature.
It was a bill by the legislature, and when you look at it in retrospect, what you were essentially doing was writing a blank check with no oversight, no accountability, no guarantees that they were going to bring the project in on budget and on time, and they have had zero incentive to do any of those things. This started out as a project that was going to be somewhere in the area of $14.5 billion. It's now going to be somewhere, could be twice that, but will be at least $23 to $24 billion. Will be at least 5 years over the timeline, and we continue to pay for it while Georgia Power continues to profit from it. There is no way that we can say that on behalf of ratepayers, this is a good deal.
Now, they did get a haircut, thanks to Commissioner Tim Eccles. Georgia Power did get a haircut on the profit margin. That was part of this agreement, too.
Well, you know, but it's funny because politically this is an interesting thing. The Republicans in general running for governor and so forth are behind. They see no alternative. Got this much built, we got to continue it. Michael Williams is the lone exception. It was interesting to see Stacey Abrams, one of the leading Democratic candidates for governor, waffle on this.
Well, I don't think she waffled.
I think she opposed it, didn't she?
No, she didn't oppose it. She said she agreed that she needed to save these jobs and keep people employed. It was a good thing, but she made
because the
Jeff's
labor
point.
unions have got 6,600 jobs there.
Yeah, she also made Jeff's point is that why are the ratepayers having to pay for this? And that was her.
But the point I want to make is for the progressives, for the left, for the communists and the socialists.
Oh, please.
This presents a real problem because this is sustainable energy.
Well,
nuclear
and,
power.
and the other thing, it's a problem also for the far right. I mean, you mentioned Michael Williams, you know, and he sees obviously the financial folly of having this kind of an arrangement, right? And here's a guy who's hard right and says, no, this is all wrong. We shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't be doing this to ratepayers and citizens of the state of Georgia.
Exactly.
It's just for an increment in nuclear electrical power from about 18 to 22%.
It's sustainable.
And Jeff, you and I discussed last week what happened over in South Carolina, where they abandoned a half-completed nuclear project, and that has created economic devastation over there. Politicians are flailing about trying to explain everything. Economic hardships. The governor's furious. We didn't want that here. Let's put that in the big picture. That's why you can't abandon it.
Well,
you could have.
And you could have.
Well, it would have been
because they did it in South
it.
Carolina. But these guys are in a hard spot. I get it. I've known Stan Watts for years, the chairman of the PSC. He's a good guy. He's a good man, and I think that he tries to make the right decision on behalf of ratepayers. You got 5 people sitting over there, a legion of lobbyists. Weighing on them, and very powerful lobbyists from very powerful, well-funded organizations. You had voices from all sides, but the pressure on those 5 commissioners is immense.
Well, and that's why I bring up the South Carolina example. I mean, we couldn't have that.
But I just think that business prevails in Georgia most of the time, and it did this time because that's the way it works. Money talks.
Well, it's also, we're very proud, and we should be. I would hope everybody's proud of the fact that for 5 years we have been touted as the best state in the country to do business with. That would have ruined that brand too. It was a tough decision.
It was
And
a hard
Plant
decision.
Vogel's the only nuclear project underway in this age of searching for sustainable energy.
Clean.
Right.
Clean, sustainable energy
let's
until
hope
it
that
blows
with
up.
the connections that we have now with Washington, D.C., that they will approve that tax credit.
Now, real quickly, we're going to talk about the legislature and what's coming up in the next two broadcasts. But I do think it was interesting that a task force by Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle came up with the idea of raising taxes, running for governor and raising taxes to equalize police and sheriff salaries, law enforcement salaries around the state. Now, let's be fair, Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle did not endorse this, but the task force suggested a tax on insurance policies.
They suggested a tax on auto insurance, and also they suggested that perhaps localities where they need pay raises could put that into their SPLOSTs. That's what was in the proposal.
And then something we've talked about a lot on this broadcast was the Fulton County tax mess, getting the bills out, getting the taxes in. There were pay arrangements being made by the Fulton County schools, by the Fulton County government. And for once, rare praise for Arthur Ferdinand, the way overpaid tax collector. He earned some of that this week because he got the money in early.
Well, I wouldn't praise him at all. I would praise people like my CPA who told me, for tax purposes, pay it before December 31st.
Well, that was because of federal. That's a federal, not a local.
Well,
Right.
well, I tell you what a mess. By the way, Fulton Countyans, you've got till January 15th to pay your property taxes.
According to the
Well, yeah, but
billing
if you
system.
wait after January 1, you might not get that federal
That's right.
tax.
That's right.
All right, we're giving all this short shrift. We got to move on. When we come back, we're going to talk about this kind of a crazy week for Kasim Reed. Stay with us.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Visit their website at fox5atlanta.com.
Coming up, the last week of the mayoralty of Kasim Reed, and we'll probably spend some time next week talking about his legacy. But it was a strange week for him this week. First of all, we should note for the record that Mary Norwood conceded the mayor's race
Finally.
to Keisha Lance Bottom. She said there were some irregularities, but nothing she could do about it, and she bowed out graciously. So now Keisha Lance Bottoms is preparing her transition. But I got the feeling it was kind of all about Kasim Reed. It always is, which I guess is the mark of a leader, in a sense. He had the Hartsfield Airport problem, which he can't avoid. The only criticism of him is the delay. One of his major accomplishments, the annexation of Emory University and the CDC and that property in DeKalb County. Now the DeKalb school system, Jeff, is saying, wait a minute, we're not going along with this, we're going to sue. So that's not a nice thing to leave in Kasim's penultimate week in office.
Well, he got the annexation done.
He did get the annexation done,
But it might have a snag or two.
but he might have to pay a little money to the DeKalb schools. And Phil, to you, the former fire chief of the city of Atlanta, Kelvin Cochran, who was fired by Kasim Reed, got a favorable ruling in federal court.
That's right. Federal Judge Lee May ruled that the city rules that Mayor Reed used to fire this fine Christian African American. Let me finish. I know you don't like this, but the First Amendment was involved. Let me finish.
Okay.
The First Amendment was involved here, and the federal judge ruled that the city's rules were too broad and they discriminated against views they disagreed with. In this case, a Christian who wrote a book on his own personal time. And so I think that Kelvin Cochran is the winner this week. I'm going to make him the winner later. And I think it was a great blow against a city that tried to stifle his First Amendment
But does he get his job back?
No.
No, he was fired, and you think that's funny, but it's a sad thing.
I'm laughing about your characterization, which is only one-sided.
Well, you characterize it then.
The judge also found for the city that they could fire the guy, and he was fired. They didn't reverse the firing.
But they said
And
Said the rules,
but
as I understand it, they said the rules were unconstitutional.
the rules were unconstitutional. You can
But
fire
they said they
anybody
could fire.
anytime. You can fire anybody
and the city
anytime in this
also
state.
maintains.
If I may,
Sure.
Go ahead.
from the ruling,
You have notes.
the court also finds that plaintiff's status as the fire chief and thus as head of a safety agency also favors the city.
Right.
Because plaintiff expressed his opinion that the death of all individuals who engage in homosexual and extramarital sex would be celebrated, it was not unreasonable for the city to fear public erosion of trust in the fire department.
They could fear it, but they should not have had these rules that stifle his speech. So that you're only reading part of what happened.
Well, here's another part.
Okay.
Plaintiff's speech caused such an actual impossible disruption that it does not warrant First Amendment protection in the workplace.
No reading.
That's
This is from the courtroom.
There you
listen.
go. Thank you. And beyond
That's not what they.
and
That's not
beyond
what they
that,
ultimately
too,
decided.
And beyond that too, the clearance protection, the city still maintains that it has authority to do that, because somebody could write something that would be in conflict of interest.
They're
going to
have to rewrite their rules. That's what the judge
I
said.
think that
just
when you
said
have
it's
someone
too
who
broad.
says that if you engage in extramarital sex or homosexual sex, that your death should be celebrated, that it casts aspersions on how far, on how quickly, and the court raised this issue. You may respond to a fire emergency.
You know, you should be
We
able
went
to
right into Roy
tolerate.
Moore
You should
territory
be
here.
able to tolerate all views,
That's what I'm
and that's
saying.
what the court ultimately
Yes,
said.
Thank you, Dick.
They just don't like Kelvin
Did you hear that?
Cochran.
We just went. I didn't realize. I'm sorry. I'm behind on this story, but I just said we veered into Roy Moore territory
We did
overnight.
indeed.
Now, one story I want to get to, just set the table for it. Lost in all the airport hubbub and the Plant Vogel hubbub was a proposal by the Atlanta Regional Commission to spend, I think it's $422 million. Think about that. It's a lot of money on improving bus service in the metro area, the broader metro. Asking MARTA to expand routes.
Right.
It also includes some road fixes, some additional lanes along the top end perimeter. I always forget the ARC is the conduit for federal money, and so that's where most of this money will come from. But it was a pretty far-reaching plan that I think we're going to see a lot from. I was surprised at it, the magnitude of it.
Yeah, it's huge.
Thoughts?
We may finally become the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority.
Well, you know,
Metro.
first of all,
They're dancing around that, of course.
Right.
This is a very, I know it sounds like a lot of money, it's a very small amount of money. You know, we were looking at billions in the
T-Splosh
2012 effort,
Yeah.
Right.
and this is $500 million. It doesn't go very far over a vast region.
Right.
And that's what ARC, you know, has say over. The other thing I will say about it is that the emphasis on bus rapid transit is exactly where we need to be.
I agree.
Everybody wants heavy rail.
I agree with that,
My
too.
friends out in East DeKalb want heavy rail. Everybody wants more heavy rail. It's too doggone expensive.
Right.
The federal government has signed off on it, said we're not doing that anymore. Find another solution. But the real problem that we need to really focus, I think, on bus rapid transit in this region is because we're so sprawled out. We're so large. We're so big that you can't do heavy rail over an area of this size.
I think what happened was the ARC announcement got pushed off the front page by Plant Vogel in the airport, and when I saw it, I said, "Where did this come from?"
Right.
All right, we got to get out. When we come back, where are we now? We're in Winners and Losers, so we'll do that in a minute.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
We've kind of discussed Kasim Reed's place in all the winners and losers activity this week, so let's try for some new stuff, and I will go to you, Jeff.
I'm sorry, I only have losers. It's Christmas time, so you know
You should have a
everybody around
winner.
the
It's
holidays
Christmas.
is going to be a winner because it's the holidays and family and all of
Okay.
that. So. The holiday season is the winner. The losers are Kelvin Cochran. His firing was upheld by the federal court, and plainly so. And the other loser's got to be Georgia Power. I mean, this is just such a you know, a black mark on the service that they provide, critical services that they provide. Redundant services that they provide. We've got to have reliable service.
Let's make the airport.
At the airport.
Let's cast some blame on the airport too, Jeff, because they didn't have a plan.
They don't have a plan, and they need to be able to communicate.
Yeah. All right. I want to be sure we're there. Alexis, go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to make the mayor my winner for the mayor's mask ball. They raised $1.3 million to support the United Negro College Fund scholarships for students. Congratulations to them, and the mayor introduced the new mayor, Keisha Lance Bottoms, herself a graduate of a historically black college, so she's certainly going to uphold that tradition. And I want to recognize her husband, Derek Bottoms. He was introduced as the first gentleman for the city of Atlanta. So we'll look forward
That's
to
right. He will be the first.
He'll be the
As
first.
the first gentleman. All right,
Right.
Phil?
You know, I think it was a great Christmas present for America. The tax reduction and the corporate tax reduction and the tax simplification. Look at the Wall Street Journal. Tax vote seals victory for Trump and also for the United States. I think that was a great.
And GDP in the third quarter was up 3.2% after 8 years of Obama saying 1 to 2% growth.
Absolutely.
Is the new norm.
And you got to say Georgia Power was a winner for finally getting the Vogel green light.
That's the best you can say for them. That's pretty optimistic right there. Okay.
Oh, did we put Chick-fil-A as a winner? We said that.
We
in
said
the-
Chick-fil-A, that's a winner.
Yeah, they're definitely a winner.
That is a winner.
The Yellow River Game Ranch is closing out in Gwinnett County. Beauregard will no longer look for his shadow. I'm going to try and relocate him. The Falcons are in an absolute monster game at 1 o'clock on Fox against the New Orleans Saints, playoff position. And Nydia Tisdale, the freelance journalist, citizen journalist, she calls herself, received probation in court in Dawson County. She should have received nothing. That was absolutely ridiculous that she has any kind of a criminal issue. And so that's it from us. Merry Christmas, everyone. Enjoy your family over this holiday.